What does pop punk mean to you? There are so many different answers to that question, each of them personal, each of them unique. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the full spectrum of pop punk, from the things everyone knows to the most obscure deep cuts. We're talking the movies and music that defined an era. We're talking fashion statements. Defend pop punk, anyone. We're talking about disturbing anecdotes from scene legends. We're talking about the best compilation record you ever heard when you were 15. We're talking fistfights, sellout accusations, and endless contracts. This is the pop punk iceberg, and it's going deep. Let's start at the top, way above the surface of the water with a few things everyone knows about pop punk. We're going to be looking at things like the biggest bands, of course, and the biggest records. But we're also going to be checking out the style and fashion, and the culture of pop punk. We'll be examining one of pop punk's most era-defining movies, and taking a look at a summer tour that shaped the development of the genre for more than 2 decades. So, let's get to it. Pop punk is all about blending the key elements of 2 genres, the catchy earnestness of pop and the raw energy of punk. So which bands did this best? Who's helped to craft that signature pop punk sound we all know and love? Let me throw some names at you. Blink-182, Green Day, Sum 41, The Offspring. If we're talking about an iceberg, then these guys are at the very pinnacle. These are the bands that took the blueprint laid down by the likes of NoFX, Bad Religion, and Rancid, and turned it into a real, bankable mainstream genre. It's these artists that were the public face of pop punk back in the 90s, and to an extent, that's still true today. Your mom probably likes these guys, although probably not all their stuff. We're not talking about Taylor Swift here, although she might get a mention later on. Instead, we're talking about the eras of pop punk. There's a bit of debate around this, but in a basic sense it breaks down like this. 1976 to 1990, the pre-pop punk age. Ramones, Undertones, Descendants, Jawbreaker. This is where it all began. The bands who were doing pop punk before pop punk was ever even a thing, laying the groundwork for what would follow. 1990 to 1999, the pop punk explosion. NoFX, Green Day, The Offspring, Blink-182. In the 90s, the whole thing exploded. Bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam had put guitar music on the map, but for a generation of punk kids, this wasn't quite enough. So in California, and elsewhere, but mainly California, bands began offering an alternative. Something fun, fast, and influenced by skateboarding culture. 2000 to 2008, Y2K pop punk. Newfound Glory, Simple Plan, A Day to Remember, The Starting Line. Around the new millennium, the scene shifted gears. Emo and hardcore had always been kinda adjacent to pop punk, but now the genres were blending together like never before. Heavier, more emotionally driven pop punk became the norm. 2009 to present, the new generations, the Wonder Years, Men Overboard, This Time Next Year, Title Fight. By 2009, those original early 90s pop punks had fully grown up, and there was a new generation of kids taking the genre to new heights. Subsets like realistic pop punk and defend pop punk began to emerge. More on those later on. You probably think I'm totally wrong about this, so don't forget to let me know your own pop punk era breakdown in the comments. There are a lot of records that have come close to perfection for pop punk fans. Dookie by Green Day really put pop punk in the mainstream consciousness, although many fans prefer the follow-up Insomniac by Green Day. Smash by The Offspring is another record that blew the genre wide open, and was one of pop punk's biggest hits. Until Blink's Enema of the State came along, a record that managed to be just as good as Smash, but an even bigger mainstream hit. And how about Sum 41? Their All Killer No Filler is a regular feature on all-time greatest lists, while Sticks and Stones by Newfound Glory moved the genre in a new hardcore and emo-influenced direction. There are literally dozens of records we could include here. Punk in Drublic by NoFX, for example, and Rancid's And Out Come the Wolves, or AFI's goth pop punk masterpieces Black Sails in the Sunset or The Art of Drowning. 2 more records that define the boundaries of what was possible. Everyone has their own favorite record, and it's likely your own favorite is not here. But this is a list of some of the great pop punk unifiers, the records that almost everyone agrees are among the defining releases of the genre. The Warped Tour, the traveling circus of pop punk that tore up America, and subsequently the world, for a few stunning weeks every summer. This was a true pop punk proving ground, a place where legends were made and new favorite bands were discovered. Kevin Lyman started the tour after working on Lollapalooza. He loved the whole idea of the Lollapalooza festival, but felt it shunned the growing punk and skateboarding community, so he decided to give this community a tour of its own. The tour sure had its ups and downs. I made 3 whole videos about that. But hats off to Kevin Lyman for creating something so enduring. Every generation has its era-defining teen movie. For the younger generation, it's Superbad or Mean Girls. For the even younger generation, it's quite likely something I've never heard of. But for pop-punk fans who came of age in the early 2000s, it's American Pie. That bawdy humor might not have aged so well in some instances, but the chaotic teen energy of the movie really encapsulated the pop-punk scene. And the soundtrack too. Blink-182, Green Day, Sum 41, American Hi-Fi, and others all feature across the series. The fashion, the vibe, the tunes, even the sun-drenched California suburban backdrop. American Pie really helped to shape the public perception of pop-punk. Up here at the tip of the iceberg, we've got to include the pop-punk style. This has changed a bit over the years, but the archetypal style is Vans trainers, baggy jeans, or Dickies work pants, and the tee of your favorite band, or your favorite skateboard brand. The bands themselves added to this style, particularly Blink-182. Macbeth shoes and Atticus and Famous Stars and Straps clothes were all launched by members of Blink, and all became part of the pop-punk aesthetic. In fact, Blink-182 are real pop-punk style icons. Much of the early 2000 pop-punk style was driven by people wanting to look like Mark, Tom, and Travis, with studded belts and lip piercings. For the girls, the style icon was probably Avril Lavigne, who showed off new ways to rock a skater chic look. In later years, there was a lot more crossover with the emo style. Pants got a bit tighter, fringes got a bit longer. But pop-punk style was always a bit more practical, like you might be called up to pop an ollie at a moment's notice. There's a reason for that, and we'll explore it later on as we head down in level 2 of the iceberg. Okay, still with me so far? Let's take a deep dive beneath the waves. For Chapter 2, we're examining aspects of the subculture that are just outside the mainstream consciousness. They're still well known, but now we're starting to dig into what pop-punk is really all about. I'm talking side projects and the art of perfecting the cover version. I'm also talking cultural influences and one of the genre's defining record labels. But to start off, let's take a look at one of the granddaddies of the scene itself, the band that some believe started it all. Plenty of bands can lay some kind of claim to being the first pop-punk outfit. The Ramones certainly incorporated elements of pop. Northern Ireland's The Undertones laid some of the groundwork for the genre, with their sunny chord progressions and teen realist lyrics. But it's a California band that really set the tone that would come over the following decades. Descendants. Those early Descendants records were raucous affairs, and the group fit right in on that early 1980s hardcore scene. But over time, the melodies came shining on through, and by the time Everything Sucks landed in 1996, they were the quintessential pop-punk band with a ton of great tunes behind them. Name-checked by the likes of Tom DeLonge and Chris Rowe of the Ataris, the pop-punk sound we all know and love just wouldn't exist without Descendants. The only reason they didn't make the top layer of the iceberg is, well, they're just not that famous outside of the scene. Descendants never achieved that mainstream crossover that would propel them to superstardom. Pop-punk bands love a side project. This could be because pop-punk, while awesome, can be a little limiting. I talked about this at length in my Blink-182 video, about how Tom and Travis felt creatively stifled, and formed Boxcar Racer with the Transplants as outlets. But this is really just scratching the surface. Green Day have been involved in numerous side projects over the years, from Pinhead Gunpowder to The Network. Members of No Use for a Name, NoFX, and others have put out numerous albums as Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. More about those guys in a moment. Dan Andriano of Alkaline Trio, Brendan Kelly of the Lawrence Arms, and Dave House of the Loved Ones all appear in The Falcon. International Superheroes of Hardcore is basically just Newfound Glory, flexing their hardcore muscles. Side projects are ingrained into the very soul of pop-punk. They can also be a bit of a problem, which is why I've included them so high up the iceberg. Tensions over Boxcar and the Transplants were among the reasons that very nearly brought Blink-182 grinding to a halt back in the early 2000s. Side projects can be fun, but they can lead to real bitterness and resentment too. So how about Me First and the Gimme Gimmes? Well, if you've ever heard I Will Survive, or Wild World, or Me and Julio Down at the Schoolyard, you'll probably know that these guys don't write their own songs. They do covers of classic pop hits, and they do it supremely well. While few bands embrace this to quite the same extent as MF and the GGs, covering pop tracks is a rite of passage for pop-punk bands. Look at Goldfinger with 99 Red Balloons, Wheatus with A Little Respect, Real Big Fish with Take On Me. Newfound Glory have done a whole series of records of movie soundtrack covers. The Atari's biggest hit to date was a version of Don Henley's Boys of Summer. Neck Deep recorded a version of Natalie Imbruglia's Torn. And then there are the Fearless Records compilations. The most famous of these is their Punk Goes Pop series, but there are others. Punk Goes Acoustic, Punk Goes 80s, Punk Goes Classic Rock. All in all, they've put out 19 albums and counting, full of punk, metal, and emo covers. What could I say? Pop punk bands love some pop music. But it seems that love goes both ways. The world of pop music has proven itself eager to tip its hat in the direction of pop punk too. I've done videos on Avril Lavigne and Ashley Simpson, but these two are perhaps a little too close to the pop punk scene to be included here. Instead, how about the likes of Demi Lovato and Katy Perry appearing on the Warped Tour? Both embraced pop punk elements in their sound, and both embraced the chaos of pop punk's biggest summer tour. And Pink, who made a punkier edge part of her whole identity. Taylor Swift, of course, the biggest pop star of the moment, has shown herself to be a bit of a pop punk fan. She also brought Hayley Williams and Paramore out on tour with her. Even more recently, the likes of Machine Gun Kelly and Olivia Rodrigo have been showing off their pop punk credentials. The influence of pop punk on pop is stronger than ever. People talk about 1994 as the year pop punk broke into the mainstream, thanks to labels like Epitaph and Fat Wreck. But by the turn of the millennium, there was a new kid in town, and they were about to change everything. That new kid was Drive-Thru. Started by the sibling duo of Richard and Stephanie Rains, Drive-Thru brought out some serious genre-defining records. Can you imagine 21st century pop punk without the influence of stone-cold classics like New Found Glory's Nothing Gold Can Stay, or the starting lines Say It Like You Mean It? No? Well, that's a testament to the influence of this label. Even the band's less well-known gems, like Save the World, Lose the Girl by Midtown, or Kings of Pop by Homegrown, are better than most of the stuff other labels put out. Incredible work from the Rainses. Pop punk and skateboarding culture go hand in hand. You might have noticed this when I talked about pop punk style. Without the skateboarding subculture, perhaps Mark Hoppus and Tom DeLonge would never have met. They'd probably be accountants or something. Without the Tony Hawk game soundtracks, even some of pop punk's biggest names wouldn't have sold nearly the number of records they did. There's even a whole subgenre of pop punk devoted to the pastime. Skate punk bands like Propagandhi and Screeching Weasel are responsible for some of the best records of the last few decades. It doesn't matter whether you were ripping up the vert ramp while listening to Lagwagon back in high school, or just thought DC shoes and Volcom tees were kinda cool. If you're into pop punk, then you're into skateboarding culture. Now it's time to turn the obscurity up a couple of notches. We're deep down in the heart of the iceberg now. Down here, we're looking at some of the debates that have raged back and forth in the scene for years. We're also checking out two of the subcultures that have taken pop punk to new heights in the last couple of decades, and some of the Easter eggs that pop punk musicians like to leave for us when they record their albums. But we're kicking off with something a bit more controversial. Pop punk always had an awkward relationship with success. On the one hand, it's pop-influenced music. Catchy, accessible, fun. On the other, it's still punk. It's supposed to be militantly nonconformist and anti-mainstream. So when bands get big, there are always plenty of haters ready to tear them down. Just ask the likes of Green Day and Rancid. Both of these bands came like rockets out of the Bay Area of Northern California, and both ended up selling loads of records and signing to majors. And so both bands got accused of losing sight of their roots. The fact that most people who cry sellout are A, jealous of success, and B, completely ignorant of the realities of being in a band people actually want to see, doesn't matter. If you believe those haters, then Rancid and Green Day sold out, and you should never listen to a single one of their tracks ever again. Of course, this is not true, and you absolutely should not do that. What happens when you get to the end of The Offspring's Smash, but you forget to hit stop? Well, after a lot of silence, you get a cool Middle Eastern-style instrumental version of Come Out and Play. And how about Green Day's Dookie? Well, after final track FOD, fans are treated to drummer Trey Cool and a baby-voiced acoustic rendition of his song All By Myself. New Found Glory did the same thing on 2002's Sticks and Stones, including the Toothpick song as a hidden bonus for listeners. These hidden tracks, not included in the track listing but definitely there on the record, became a bit of a pop-punk staple. You'll find a hidden track on most AFI albums. On Good Charlotte's self-titled record, there's a gentle, emo-tinged Thank You Mom. The closing seconds of the first Distillers album feature a demo preview of the track Young Girl, which would be released later on Sing Sing Death House. Rise Against's Revolutions Per Minute even features a cover of Journey's Any Way You Want It, buried away at the end. Leaving a little Easter egg for eager fans unwilling to let go was the thing to do as a pop-punk band in the 90s and 2000s. The pop-punk scene was pretty exciting in the early 2010s. Newfound Glory were at the height of their powers, and the likes of Set Your Goals, Title Fight, and 4 Year Strong were adding awesome hardcore dynamism to the genre. But there was something else going on too. Realistic pop-punk. Pop-punk had always embraced elements of introspection and philosophy, but these bands were taking it to the next level. Bands like The Story So Far, Transit, Balance and Composure, and The Wonder Years. These were groups willing to tackle weighty themes and plumb the depths of mental health and self-examination. Similar to the way in which conscious hip-hop artists like Mos Def and Common offered something new to rap music, these bands were reimagining what was possible with pop-punk. Records like The Wonder Years' Suburbia, I've Given You All and Now I'm Nothing, and Transit's Listen and Forgive remain some of the greatest examples of a genre that's way more versatile than it gets credit for. Around the same time as the realist pop-punk movement, there was another movement going on, both an audio movement and a visual one. It all came from the band Man Overboard. Named after a Blink-182 song themselves, this New Jersey band was not ashamed to wear their pop-punk hearts on their sleeves. Their Defend Pop-Punk tee became a fashion staple in the 2010s. It was a symbol of defiance, a symbol that showed, despite the bad press pop-punk sometimes got, and despite the reluctance to take the genre seriously, this was not just a phase, and it was not going out without a fight. Man Overboard might be the most prominent face of Defend Pop-Punk, but the likes of the Swellers, This Time Next Year, All Time Low, and Fireworks were all part of the movement's vanguard too. Maybe when you think of pop-punk, it's Southern California that springs to mind. That sunny SoCal climate and laid-back lifestyle is something we talked about early on, and it's sure a big part of the pop-punk vibe. But when we really look into it, some of the best pop-punk actually came from further north, NorCal, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Legendary ska hardcore hybrid Operation Ivy came from this part of the world, and were signed to local label Lookout Records. Operation Ivy birthed some of the best-loved pop-punk bands of the 1990s, such as Rancid and Green Day. Close by, you had the likes of NoFX and AFI too. It's no wonder that when Alkaline Trio relocated to California from Chicago in 2001, they chose San Francisco, not LA. Although Matt Skiba does now live in LA. Ska can be a little bit, well, divisive. For some, ska is life, maybe like Andy Samberg in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. For others, the trumpets and sax, the rapid upstrike chords, get a little too much. Whichever side you're on, whether you're a certified skanker or you think ska time equals bar time, you can't ignore the impact of ska on pop-punk. Most of the big bands from earlier waves of pop-punk incorporated a little bit of ska into their sound. Some even went all out, like Mighty Mighty Bosstones, Goldfinger, Less Than Jake, and Real Big Fish, to name a few. Even the steeliest resistors of ska in pop-punk have to admit that tracks like The Impression That I Get, Spokesman, and Gainesville Rock City are great tunes. We're in deeper water now. Join me as we get super obscure. We're gonna expand our scope to take in some of the coolest slices of pop-punk from around the world. We're also looking at two legends of the genre who never quite received the wider recognition they certainly deserved. And then, there are the greatest compilation albums no one ever heard of, and just what happens when pop-punk musicians get academic. There's plenty to explore down here at Level 4, so let's take a look. There's a tendency to look at pop-punk as an American medium, or at least North American once you've factored in the likes of Propaganda, Sum 41, and Simple Plan from Canada. But this is actually not the case. Pop-punk is for everyone. It's a global phenomenon. Take Useless ID, for example. Hailing from Haifa, the Israeli punks were on Kung Fu Records for a while and are still on Fat Wreck to this day. And Sweden's Millencolin, their No Cigar track, is a pop-punk favorite. In fact, the whole Burning Heart Records roster shows how strong the Swedish scene can be. And Frenzal Rhomb over in Australia, Mr. Smug in South Africa, Elgarden from Japan, Fresno from Brazil. Everywhere you look around the world, there's great pop-punk, and fans who love it. When the Ataris covered Jawbreaker's Boxcar on their 1997 album Anywhere But Here, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were giving a nod to one of the most influential bands of the previous generation of punk rockers, and a band that doesn't get the respect it deserves. California's Jawbreaker had been around since the 1980s, and were the elder statesmen of the punk scene. Records like Bivouac and 24 Hour Revenge Therapy are still name-checked today as formative pop-punk works. With 1995's Dear You, though, things went a little awry. The band ditched some of their punk snarl for something a little more mainstream. This, coupled with the fact that the band were now on a major label, drew sharp criticism from punk purists. Yeah, they got accused of selling out. Contrary to what some believe, it wasn't the pressure from naysayers that forced the band to split. By this point, core members Chris Bauermeister and Blake Schwarzenbach weren't the biggest fans of each other. While on tour with Foo Fighters, the pair ended up coming to blows, like actually punching each other. Of course, this was all a long time ago now. Jawbreaker are back together, and to listen to Dear You will tell you it's actually a very good album. You see how silly those sellout accusations can be. The history of pop punk is marked by great labels. Record companies like Epitaph, Fat Wreck, Nitro, and Kung Fu were formed by bands, for bands. Later on, the likes of Drive-Thru and Vagrant would release some of the seminal pop-punk albums of the era. While plenty of kids knew about these labels, they still had to promote their bands, and they did that with label samplers, budget CDs with around 20 awesome tracks, showcasing the best of what the label had to offer. In time, these samplers turned into cultural touchstones in their own right. Everyone remembers the Epitaph Punkorama series, or the Fat Wreck Fat Music for Fat People series. But how about Kung Fu's Punk Rock Is Your Friend, or Hellcat's Given the Boot? Back in the days before Spotify playlists and Bandcamp, this was the way to discover new bands. No, The Academics is not the name of some cool, obscure pop-punk band. Instead, we're talking about literal academics. The university doctorate type of academic. We've got Greg Graffin of Bad Religion fame, with his PhD in zoology. Dexter Holland of The Offspring also has a PhD in biology, of the molecular variety. And don't forget Milo Aukerman of Descendants. Their Milo Goes to College album wasn't named by accident. He really was going to college, studying for a PhD of his own, also in biology. Pop punk can be fun and silly, but it can be smart too. Super smart. And inspirational too. These guys have inspired plenty of pop punk kids to explore their own potential, whether that's through music, college, or something else. Lifetime are one of those bands that shaped an entire genre and then disappeared without a trace. Well, almost. Across 3 stunning albums, Dan Yemin and his fellow bandmates made huge waves in the melodic hardcore scene between 1990 and 1997. They weren't afraid to embrace the pop and alt-rock side of things either. We were as much into Elvis Costello and Billy Bragg as we were into Minor Threat and Black Flag, Yemin said. Without Lifetime, you wouldn't have Newfound Glory, Fall Out Boy, A Day to Remember, or any of those bands that emerged from the hardcore scene to carve out niches in pop punk. But ultimately, it's that 1997 breakup that leaves them down here at level 4 of the iceberg. They never got to share in the success their protégés would have over the next few years. Nowadays, though, Lifetime are back together. They released another record on Decadence in 2007, 10 years after the initial breakup, and they're still touring. Lifetime lives on. Pop punk has often turned away from politics. In fact, for bands like The Undertones, not singing about the precarious political situation in Northern Ireland in the 1970s was what set them apart from rawer compatriots like Stiff Little Fingers. But politics has been a big part of pop punk at times. Most of Bad Religion stuff is pretty political. Green Day's American Idiot is certainly political. Bands like Anti-Flag, Strike Anywhere, and Rise Against have made entire careers off this. Back in 2004, it was impossible to ignore politics in pop punk. The Rock Against Bush compilations featured the best and brightest of the early 2000s scene, and were great records, regardless of which side of the divide you were on. And the influence of political pop punk would stick around too. American Idiot even became a musical several years later. There were backlashes, of course. A less successful Rock for Bush movement was formed, featuring former misfit Michael Graves. Elsewhere, Australian punks and other musicians released their own compilation, Rock Against Howard, in protest against Australia's Prime Minister John Howard. Here we are, way down in the depths. If you know about any of this stuff, then you're surely a real pop-punk fan. Not that this is a competition. Down here, we've got rare vinyls and split records, and mysterious figures and identity speculations. We've also got a figure whose identity is certainly not a mystery, but who managed to throw everyone a curveball just the same. And there's the story of one of pop-punk's biggest names getting banned from one of the genre's most famous venues. Join me for part 5. When a band wants to put out music but can't afford to do it themselves, what do? They record a split EP, 2 or 3 songs from their own band and 2 or 3 songs from their buddies on one CD. So it's a practical decision, but in pop punk it grew to be something much more than that. Split singles and LPs became symbols of togetherness and unity, 2 things pop punk was supposed to be about. It also gave us some great music. Jimmy Eat World's split with Christie Front Drive helped launch their careers. I've done a whole other video about this too. Alkaline Trio and Hot Water Music put out a stunning split EP, featuring cover versions of each other's tracks, as well as new material. BYO Records really went off the deep end, releasing a series of split LPs featuring the likes of NoFX and Hot Water Music, The Bouncing Souls and Anti-Flag, and Alkaline Trio and One Man Army. Split records became a niche fascination among pop punk fans. Check out some of these if you haven't already. There's No Return from '86. Billy Joe Armstrong sang cryptically on the track 86 from Insomniac. Only it wasn't so cryptic. Green Day have been pretty candid about what it means. After releasing the album Dookie on a major label in 1994, Green Day were banned from playing the legendary punk venue 924 Gilman Street in Berkeley. This is the meaning of 86, a slang term for being kicked out or being excluded. Venue owner Maximum Rock and Roll's Tim Yohannan was famously hardline about supposed selling out. And there you go, those sellout accusations again. So Green Day wrote a song about him. In fact, they wrote 3, including Platypus, I Hate You, and in a particularly brutal move, Ha Ha You're Dead. The latter emerged on the B-Sides and Rarities collection Shenanigans in 2002. Yohannan died in 1998. Both of these things are true. 1. Drive-Thru Records put out some of the biggest selling pop-punk records of a generation. 2. Drive-Thru Records is no more. So what happened here? Well, the official reason is that Drive-Thru called time on their operations so that the Rains could focus on music management instead. But fans are always looking for a bit of gossip, and an underlying reason behind these kinds of things. One of the rumors that fans came up with is that Drive-Thru were putting bands on mega-long contracts that wasn't really serving anyone. Sure, Newfound Glory might knock out 6 or 7 hit albums, but that's not how the music scene works as a whole. Back when pop punk was still the flavor of the month, you might get 1 hit record out of 5 kids from Rando, North Dakota. But signing them to a 7-album deal wasn't going to magnify that success. Whether Drive-Thru really died off because of their strange approach to contracts, we can't be certain. But those rumors sure set the web aflame for a while. Lots of genres have rare vinyls, records that collectors spend years and plenty of dollars searching for. But pop punk seem to have more than most. Part of this is due to name changes. Any records with Blink rather than Blink 182 or River Phoenix rather than Phoenix TX on the sleeve is going to go for a lot of money. Things like the original pressings of Take This to Your Grave by Fall Out Boy, the version of Cheshire Cat with the red eyes rather than blue, and Joyride by Transit are all pretty sought after on vinyl, as is While You Were Sleeping by The Story So Far. For pop-punk purists and completists, crate digging and vinyl collecting have become important and expensive pastimes. Masked Intruder are a really cool pop-punk band from Madison, Wisconsin. In the band we've got Intruder Green, Intruder Blue, Intruder Red, and Intruder Purple. There used to be an Intruder Yellow, but he's now listed as in jail. The band's whole shtick is that they're anonymous criminals on the run for the law. But in truth, they are anonymous punk rock musicians on the run from internet speculation. So who the hell are they? The Jaded Punk blog have put some potential names forward. Mikey from the Ergs is a rumored member, or MI could potentially be a side project of members of Teenage Bottle Rocket or Dear Landlord. Red Scare label owner Toby Jag is another possibility, as is his fellow Chicago musician Brendan Kelly from the Lawrence Arms. The truth is, no one knows but the guys themselves. The Masked Intruder mystery endures. Way down at the bottom of the iceberg, we've got Cokie the Clown. This is a bit of an odd one, because Cokie is actually Fat Mike from NoFX, one of the biggest names of the genre. But back in 2010, Cokie the Clown was a real enigma, a real deep cut from the depths of the pop-punk vaults. It all began with a NoFX EP named after the eponymous clown. There was nothing unusual about this, except the lyrics seemed a little more personal. Straight Outta Massachusetts gives a bouncy but kinda sad look at Fat Mike's own childhood, while My Orphan Year is an astonishingly unflinching look at Mike's relationship with his parents. Fans were taken aback by the brutal honesty of the record. The following year, Fat Mike performed a solo show in the guise of Cokie. At Emo's in Austin, Texas, he regaled fans with a bunch of different songs and told stories about his life and his work. Many of those stories were seriously disturbing, including witnessing a rape and helping with his mother's assisted dying. Those in attendance were not quite sure what to make of the whole thing, which was a world away from your typical NoFX show. Mike has since played other shows as Koki and has released a whole album of Koki tracks, but he's never got quite so deep, quite so honest, as on that day in Texas back in 2010. Thanks for sticking this one out with me. We really got deep with this one, exploring just how multifaceted and diverse pop punk can be. There's so much more to explore too. I had to be discerning here and pick the key points for each level of this sprawling berg. Let me know what I missed in the comments. There's probably enough material to do this again. An even bigger iceberg, and even more great stories. Until then, check out another pop punk deep dive coming right up. And please, like and subscribe. It means a lot.